Well, good morning, Seattle Unity Church. I am so delighted to be here to connect with you. It's been way too long, and I hope that there's someday very soon that I can be with you in person. But thank you, Reverend Karen, for inviting me to join with you this morning. It really is an honor. And, Karen has been a mentor of mine for so long, from the days that I started the path of becoming a licensed Unity teacher, which I did in 1995, and ultimately took the deep dive into ministry and became ordained in 2007. And it's been quite a journey, but I'm grateful to be with you today. And it really is come about because Karen has also supported me in my grief journey. And ultimately, my healing process has led me to writing a book that she shared with you I just released recently, Unraveling Grief. And so I want to talk to you today about the depth of grief, the gift within grief, the teacher that is grief. And I want to start with a question, because I don't believe that there's anyone breathing out there that has never experienced some form of sadness, of pain or loss or grief. Right? It's part of our human experience. Has anyone out there been feeling the impact of loss or something significant and meaningful to you, most especially the death of a loved one? Yes, I feel that for you. I feel that for all of humanity, for our entire planet, for our country, and all that we've been going through. And I understand that you and your community have recently lost someone that you were deeply connected with, and are working through that process of releasing his presence, and that you feel that sense of that there's something missing now because he has transitioned. So I understand that. But have you ever considered that there may be something within your grief that holds a gift for us all to discover, something that could actually enhance who you are? My journey into the depths of grief, the pain of loss, has revealed that there is. And there is something for all of us if we're willing to shift from avoiding or attempting to get rid of it, or to get rid of it, or to get over it, and ultimately embrace it instead. A new concept, perhaps. As the world around us is changing in ways that we never imagined, that we're shifting into this reality that we find unfamiliar and uncertain, this, really scary virus, this COVID-19 that has found its way into the world, that has impacted us in ways that we have no idea what our future will be like. In the beginning, it was always, well, when we get back to normal. But we know that normal is what we're experiencing right now, and the new normal is changing constantly. And so we don't have a grasp on what it's going to be. And if we don't have a foundation of how to manage it, then the grief that is triggered from the loss, even the impact of the loss of humanity, as we watch the world around us and the numbers raising, and over 200,000 people in our country alone have died from this horrible virus. And it has triggered other things, the racial injustice, the violence, the political arena, all these things that are being brought out into the light for us to acknowledge, to release, and to transform. Grief has been triggered within most of us on a global impact as a result of all of this. And so any unresolved grief that we may be carrying around with us, and we all have some, because we haven't been taught to deal with it, even the small, little painful losses. As a child, the things that maybe our parents didn't even realize that we were impacted by sadness and loss. We carry these things around with us, collecting them in our lifetime. And then they get triggered with the experience of new pain and loss coming into our current reality. And it just impacts it as in a greater way, because it just adds to all the stuff we haven't dealt with already. So it's no wonder that we're so easily triggered. I know I can watch things on the news and the impact of others, and my heart breaks for them, and it triggers my own pain. So today I wanted to invite you into the conversation of grief, to really be open to understanding what it is, how it impacts us, and why it's important to process it. and and maybe how we can come to understanding navigating the pain of loss, and that ultimately we can discover that there is an empowering gift within grief that can be discovered in the process if we're willing to go there, if we're willing to be open to receiving it and to accept it. There's a story about the Dalai Lama on sadness that I shared in my book because I felt like it was a wonderful demonstration of understanding the impact of loss for all of us, that Dalai Lama is not an exception. He's just as human as we are. And Pema Chodron, an American Zen monk, also shared it in her book, Getting Unstuck, which I highly recommend, by the way. But the story is that the Dalai Lama was asked if there's anything in his life that he feels sad about. And he related a personal story to the co-author about how he was approached by an elderly monk who couldn't do certain yoga poses due to his deteriorated physical condition and age. Some of you might say, well, I never was able to do yoga poses, but at this point, this elderly monk was distressed by it. And so the Dalai Lama suggested that he not do them harm, or that he not do the yoga poses anymore, that maybe he was just too old, so stop doing them. The Dalai Lama later found out that this monk had committed suicide, thinking that he would be reincarnated into a younger body and thus then able to do the exercises. So the Dalai Lama was left with deep sadness and regret that he had somehow unintentionally been responsible for this man's death, this man's suicide. And the interviewer was stopped in his tracks and he said, "Oh my goodness, how did you ever get rid of that feeling of sadness?" And the Dalai Lama paused for a very long time. And he thought about that. And then he said, "I didn't. It's still there. I just don't allow it to drag me down and pull me back into it. I realized that being dragged down or held back by sadness would be to no one's benefit, including my own. So not mine or anyone else's. So I go forward and I do the best that I can." What a wonderful way to look at it, and what a wonderful teaching. We go forward and we do the best that we can. We all have this idea somehow that we either have deep sadness, the experience of grief and regret, or we just get rid of it and then it's not an issue anymore, like a magic wand. But there is an ability to be pierced to the heart of the sorrow of the world and your own sadness and regret without dragging us down. We just haven't been taught how. We haven't been encouraged to have conversations about it, to seek the resources and support for it in healthy ways. So I began to realize that in my own journey into the depths of heartbreak and pain that began, I didn't realize, on May 30th, 2013. It was the last day I had a conversation with my youngest son, Justin. I have two sons. And 7 days later, I was trying to call him to let him know that I was leaving town to go on a 5-day cruise with my Unity colleagues for a convention at sea on a cruise ship that year. And I was traveling across country and I arrived at Fort Lauderdale at baggage claim, and I turned my phone back on and my son Ryan called and he said, "Mom, are you sitting down?" And when somebody says that, you know that it's probably not good news. So I just said, "What's wrong? Just tell me." And he said, "Mom, Justin's gone." "What do you mean he's gone?" "Mom, he's dead. He was found in a river. He's gone." And my heart stopped. I mean, if you can imagine, the worst nightmare a parent can ever hear is that their child has been found dead. And you go into this place of denial and you think, I didn't hear that right. That can't be. I mean, it hasn't been that long since I talked to him. I tried to call him. Maybe they made a mistake. But it was the beginning of many months of literally feeling like I had been slammed out of my body, that I was a walking observer of life, that I didn't even know if I could breathe again. that my heart just stopped when I heard that news. And this tsunami of emotion just rolled over me. And I didn't know if I would recover. I had nightmares. I couldn't sleep. I didn't know what had happened to him. And ultimately, I came to realize that he had been murdered by an intentional act of violence, which just added another layer of um, extreme heartbreak, and trying to overcome how to rationalize that, and coming to terms and realizing there is no rationalizing that, but I had to go through that process. But ultimately, because when I was grateful for this, I had a spiritual foundation. I was leading a spiritual community. I'd been a minister for a number of years. I'd been teaching, for over a decade, spiritual principles. And I realized that if I was going to walk my talk, if I was going to demonstrate what I've been teaching others and encouraging them, I had to do it for myself. And I had to have the courage to dig deep into that pain to discover what it had to teach to me, because there had to be something that it offered of value, as a part of life. And ultimately, I discovered that there's a gift in doing that. And that I came to know the new version of me resulting from my traumatic experience of grief. So, what I want to invite you into is to not be afraid of an emotional reaction of pain when you feel it. Because one, it's a sign that you have the capacity to love. And that's a very good thing. And two, that your recovery process is being initiated. It's a sign that you're being led back to wholeness. Because what happens when we're physically wounded? We have pain, and so we realize that our body, there's something that needs attention, that it needs support, and everything in our body rushes to support that. We're divinely designed to do that. And same thing with emotional recovery. And so what is happening in the world now, in our country now, with the pain of change, of uncertainty, and of the need to withdraw and to live from a new place of awareness, is a sign recovery into wholeness is in process, if we're willing to dive into our discomfort. And so one of the things that I found that I needed to find some spiritual foundation to support me in understanding grief and how to get through it. And looking to Jesus as a teacher, as a way shower, and the Beatitudes, which really are, just ways of living and guidelines for life. I found in the second Beatitude that you may be familiar with: blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And it's not about being a martyr or living as a victim, but in realizing our authentic mourning can empower us and offer us exactly what we seek. Jesus didn't want us to in any way think that inhibiting the grieving process was a good thing. For when he spoke, remember, he's always talking about consciousness. So what is it offering us to transform and heal us, to empower us in new and profound ways? What can we realize in the moment of awareness that something of value is being offered to be integrated into our reality and to expand our realization and understanding of this life experience, this very deep life experience? So I think when he is saying blessed are those that mourn, he's saying that we're blessed because we've had terrible losses, and to realize that these terrible losses are literally paradigm shifters. They can transform us in powerful ways. They allow us to change our thinking, to open us up to new worlds, new realities, new expressions. And we're going to be invited to live in this new world based on this crisis, this loss, this pain that is changing us in the moment that it happened, whether we know it or not, whether we choose to or not. We're thrown into it, as I came to realize. So we have to go through the grieving process. It's not something you can go around over. You can't dig under it. You can't tiptoe around it. You have to go through it. We need to acknowledge what has been lost, not deny it. And that we miss something. We're mourning something, that there's There's a hole left in our heart or a piece of us that feels like it's missing and we don't know how to function without it. And we have to acknowledge who we were in the situation, because ultimately we mourn that part of ourself that has been forever changed. The moment grief was set into motion, the moment loss happens, we've been changed. Just like in our country, in our reality, because of this COVID virus, our lifestyle has been changed. And we can't put it back in the same box anymore. So we can't fit back into the same box anymore either. Part of the process of grieving that Jesus is offering us, if we choose to accept it, is to realize that I am no longer the same person. And so as long as I'm trying to be that person, I'm going to stay stuck in the suffering. But if I'm willing to dive deep enough to get to know myself, then I can come to realize a part of myself that will enhance who I am, a new rich texture, an essence of me that's been there all along, just waiting to be revealed. And that's the beauty, the gift within the courage to process grief. An interpretation of Jesus' beatitude might be, blessed, or maybe more likely the word enlightened, are those whose identity is so shaken that they can begin to discover that part of themselves that can never be shaken, that divine part. Because grief really shakes us up, right? It's like when we go through an earthquake that you're familiar with in Seattle. Our ground is unstable. And there's a moment where we're not sure what to do. We're not sure where the safe places are. And we can feel that way in grief. So deep mourning leads us literally to finding God, that connection of the divine. George Harrison said something, the one from the Beatles, that in this human dissatisfaction with life, that we seek happiness, and yet we only find it when we come to know God. And so we have to go deep within ourselves. And that process of coming to know God is coming to know the relationship of ourself. Because didn't Jesus say, the Christ and I are one, the Father and I are one, that we are one with that divine essence, that is that ceaseless, restless, creative energy of life we call God. And so in order to know God, we also ultimately come to know ourself, our divine self. And when we have been so shaken to the core, we seek to know our relationship with that self, where we might be comforted, we might be guided, we might be directed in a quantum leap of spiritual growth. And that we may not have reached deep enough to know otherwise. That's the gift within grief and what it offers us. Would I want to go through it again? Would I rather have my son back? Yes, but I can't. His death is permanent. And so deep mourning leads us to finding this new relationship with that which we call God. And I believe that was the depth of my own grieving process in coming to realize that. It changed me and how I view life, how I appreciate life, the fragility of life. My mourning for my son's presence became my longing for that which would comfort me. And it could only come from within. My openness to be vulnerable and changeable. Are you willing to be vulnerable and changeable? In my grief journey, I began to understand that grief really is within the human experience, that none of us escape it. It serves as our teacher, and it is not something we get over, but something to be embraced, to learn from, to discover something of value, a gift from. And it is important to realize that grief is a multifaceted response to loss, particularly the loss of someone or something that has died, to which we have a deep bond of affection. That relationship is changed, and it's painful for us to embrace that. But it will find its way into every part of our life and to every connection in life. So if we don't acknowledge it, to learn from it, it can destroy us. if we're not willing to process it, to go deep, to feel and to heal, we will carry that unresolved grief with us into everything we do. The realization that I had on grief came to me one morning when I was writing my book, when I was trying to understand what grief really meant. And I wanted to share this piece from my book. I've come to be aware that grief slowly creeps into every part of us. It infiltrates our thoughts and feelings. It seeps into our emotions and it crawls into our heart. It finds its way into the cells of our body and it takes over how we function. It finds its way into every aspect of our lives, our relationships, how we respond to the world around us, our behaviors, our perceptions, how we respond to the world on every level. We can't even recognize ourselves in time as it has taken up residence in who we are. So I've decided my only option is to make friends with grief, since we're going to be hanging out so much together. I realize it's a lifetime relationship, whether I like it or not. And so it's a good idea to take steps to get to know my new friend that seems to be influencing so much of who I am now. For me, it was realizing that grief is not my enemy, and that ultimately it has offered me the opportunity to go back to the spectrum of gratitude. Grateful for every day. It brings me back into the world of living. It brings me back into the blessings of life and ultimately the blessings of those that we mourn, that have left a permanent blessing in our hearts with those treasured memories that no one can ever take from you, and eventually can bring a smile back to our face. And we can let the tears flow and appreciate the gift of releasing, of connecting, because we feel so deeply. And so I want to leave you with this. It's something that, as a quote by Carl Jung, that really brought me home into the true gift of grief. To embrace your grief, for there your soul will grow. It's a rich gift within the art of living. So I hope you do it well. Namaste, my friends. Hope we see each other again soon.